Okay, it's time for another one of those 1 a.m. IB training podcast things, I guess. The directions here were kind of unclear as to how long this is supposed to be, but it asked me to consider these two questions, right? So it's supposed to consider why do you think ethics is given such a prominent and important place in the TOK course, and can you share a challenge that you encountered when discussing ethics in your TOK classroom? So the first one I feel is actually kind of self-explanatory. We give such a prominent role to ethics simply because ethics is the bedrock um, behind action, right? So knowledge in TOK especially is always supposed to be actionable knowledge. Like it's knowledge that we do things with. TOK in the past has been very specific about the fact that it's not like epistemology course. It's not just raw philosophy. There's an IB philosophy course for that. TOK is really about um, critical application and understanding the way that knowledge operates in the world, and then how we use that to make decisions and to do things. And the way that we make decisions and do things is always underlined by our personal ethos or ethical system. So, this is especially important whenever you look at the different AOKs and you realize that each AOK has its own take on ethical systems and ethical application. And so, the ethics of something like the sciences, human or natural, is going to be different than something like the ethics of religion or the arts or indigenous knowledge systems. The only argument here, possibly, of a place where maybe ethics doesn't fit in would be mathematics. Um, the only way that I really think that you could work with mathematics and ethics is whenever you get into statistical modeling and understanding like how we use math to understand human behavior, and the ethical implications of that, and is it ethical to try and reduce humanity to simple statistics and charts and graphs, right? Or do we have to be more nuanced in our approach to how we try and gauge things? Because math always tries to simplify and quantify. And so there's a little bit of ethical consideration in there, but not nearly as robust as other things. So I guess this leads me to the second question, which is what. Let me get the exact phrasing right here. So, a challenge that I encounter whenever discussing ethics in the classroom. So, a challenge that I encounter whenever discussing ethics in my class is that my kids don't know what the hell ethics are. They have zero. Usually, some have some vague inkling, but they usually have zero context or schema regarding ethics, and that is both applied ethics and philosophical ethics. They have no real working understanding of either. Especially whenever you get into the nitty gritty and you start separating things like morality and ethics, which I make it a point to do. So I would argue that most religious knowledge systems have moral systems, but not necessarily ethical systems, because a lot of the moral systems in religious knowledge systems are not necessarily justified. They are just divine command, as where ethical systems are defined by their justification. So I would say that most religious knowledge systems, which is what most of our students' sense of right and wrong and how they guide actions are driven by, they're being driven by religious moral systems, not necessarily by ethical systems. And so I begin every year. I do, the first couple weeks of get to know you, interest in the chorus, blow their minds with some big ideas that they've never considered before, because that's supposed to be the fun of TOK. Um, and then we dive right into the study of ethics, and I start with philosophical ethical systems. We look at denotology, we look at consequentialism, we look at utilitarianism, we look at virtue ethics, um, and we look at meta ethics, egoism. I'm trying to think what else we cover. Um, Denotology, and denotology covers like Kantian categorical imperatives. Um, so denotology, virtue ethics, which is Aristotle, Plato, utilitarianism, consequentialism, and mainly social consequentialism, because then you get into like Marxist ethics and stuff, egoism, and Ayn Rand. Oh, and then evolutionary ethics. That's right. And then evolutionary ethical systems. And we don't try and do robust, deep knowledge dives on these where we're trying to understand all the nuances and aspects. What I want them to take away is that there are various justified, well thought out approaches to how humans should behave and act, and they oftentimes do not come to the same conclusions to what the best action is. In fact, oftentimes they are at odds with each other. And then sometimes they end up with the same action but completely different reasoning and rationale for that action. And then the goal for me is to develop a common language for us to begin to speak with. Because I think that one of the other problems is that in TOK in general, with the student population that I teach, a lot of them are missing a lot of context and schema for a lot of the areas of knowledge and study, especially whenever you get into the more abstract areas. We only offer the CP and the DP. We don't have an MYP or a PYP feeder. So, these kids are in standard curriculum courses for the most part until they get to us. And standard curriculum courses focus on content acquisition, but never really critical application. And so a lot of our students think of knowledge as the stuff that you memorize or that you acquire and then you file away, and they're not really used to applying it or thinking in the abstract about these things and the implications of them. So to me, in order to have a productive class, we have to build a common vocabulary around each kind of content area. So around each AOK, we've kind of got to build a common vocabulary so that way we can have a meaningful discussion about these things. And so I spend time going through the ethical systems, and then we transition into applied ethics because I want them to understand that ethics is hard. So we study ethics in the abstract, and then I give them a lot of ethical dilemmas and ethical problems, and we look at how do you solve these, and what do those solutions say about us or the way that we think about the world, or like our interaction with the world. And so that's my podcast on these here ethics. So thanks.